Last week, we were talking about the Great Commission where Jesus told us to go and make disciples. All authority in heaven and earth is mine. He says, all authority in heaven, all authority on earth has been given to me. Now then, he said, what about that? That means that you should go and tell people, explain it to people, make disciples. And of course, to make a disciple, you have to be a disciple. But to make a disciple, you have to make a friend. There's a need for truth in the world. The world needs to know the truth about God. They need to know that all the stuff that you hear, sometimes even in churches, is wrong when it says that God is angry, God is mad, God is demanding, God is... That's all just so wrong. The emphasis is wrong and the details are wrong. God is love. That's the heart of who God is. God is love. He doesn't just... a God who will occasionally love somebody. God is love. And Jesus explained that out of what your heart is full of come your words. Out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth speaks. Well, God's heart is nothing but love. It's full of love. There's nothing in it but love. So that's what comes out of his mouth. Now, sometimes that's hard for people to understand. They look at the Bible and they read the Old Testament and say, that's terrible. That doesn't sound like a God of love to me. Well, there's shallow reading. And it's difficult. They read without the background to understand it. That is why, in the early days of the church, there was a man named Marcion who said, we ought to ditch the Old Testament. That doesn't seem to be telling us what Jesus is telling us. Just get rid of it. We have a new covenant. Let's just concentrate on the new covenant. Well, that's a mistake, because the Old Covenant has some things to teach us. But it is important to follow this. The New Testament is the basis for our understanding the Old Testament. If you think you see a conflict between the two, go with Jesus. Always. Because Jesus is God's perfect revelation of himself. He revealed himself through Moses. He revealed himself through the prophets. But people didn't get it. And that's why he said eventually, I'm going to have to go down myself. So he came himself. He came as a man, and through Jesus, we are to understand the Father. He talked about the Father a lot. And the disciples listen, yes, the Father, the Father, the Father. And finally Philip says, well, Lord, show us the Father. That's all we're asking. And Jesus says, Philip, how can you say that? Have I been with you such a long time, and still you don't know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? I and the Father are one. And the Father came to earth. When they said, oh, Jesus, you do such marvelous works and teach such amazing wisdom. He said, it's not from me. He says, the Father within me is doing his work. And the words that I speak not of myself. The Father is doing the works, and he's giving it all to me. I don't say anything that I haven't first heard from the Father. So if you want to understand God, look to Jesus. Which means that if you're trying to get to know the Bible for the first time, don't start in Genesis. Start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Get to know Jesus. That's very, very important. There's a need for truth. But you cannot understand the truth without love. And that's just vital. Now, some people say, well, yes, you need a balance. The truth is very important. Yeah, love is important, but you need a balance. No, you don't need a balance. They're not in tension needing to be balanced. They are one. The truth is love, and love is the truth. And if it's not true, it's not loving. If it's not loving, it's not true. And that's the way it really is. Love is the truth if it's real. And the truth is love. That's why Jesus gave us a new commandment. The last night of his life at the Lord's Supper. We call it Maundy Thursday because of that. Maundy is a corruption of mandatum, an old Latin word, which meant commandment. And we celebrate that night. When we call it Maundy Thursday, we're celebrating it not because they ate the Lord's Supper, but because he gave them a new commandment. And the new commandment was, love one another. Hey, that's a lot simpler than the Ten Commandments. And if we had something to be on the walls of the courtrooms of this country and on the walls of schoolrooms everywhere, I'd rather have love one another than the Ten Commandments. It would be a lot better. It would help people to understand who God really is. And this is so important. So, to make a convert is to make a disciple, and to make a disciple is to make a friend. And this means you start with, guess what? Love your neighbor. So if you love your neighbor, you'll try to make a friend of your neighbor, and then you can make a disciple of your neighbor, and that's how it's going to work. On the last night before the crucifixion, Jesus summed up his teaching to the disciples in those words, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another." And that really includes everything if you think it through. Paul said to the Romans, love is the fulfilling of the law. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to kill him. Hello? If you love your neighbor, you're not going to lie about him. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to steal from him. Love is the fulfilling of the law. All the commandments, it's all included in that, if you really love. This is why St. Augustine once said, love God and then do as you please. Because if you really are filled with the love of God, you will love your neighbor, and then the things that you will want to do are the things that God wants you to do. It's his Spirit in you. We're to be moved by his Spirit in us. So, love includes everything if we think it through. If we love anyone, we passionately want them to know the truth about our loving Father. If you really care for somebody, you want them to know the truth about God. Don't you? Doesn't that make sense? You cannot love a person and be silent if there's someone trying to give him poison to drink, can you? Hello? I know that's extreme. But you cannot love a blind man and be silent as he's walking toward a ditch, can you? Well, I'm telling you, most of the world is walking toward a ditch. You cannot love your children without telling them that playing in the street can be dangerous. You cannot love your children without telling them that a diet of potato chips and beer is not healthy. There is spiritual poison, and there is spiritual junk food. And truly loving people will try to prevent their friends and their neighbors from both. If you're a loving person, you will try to protect your friends and neighbors from spiritual poison and spiritual junk food. And it is spiritual poison to tell them that God is an angry, demanding monster who has a sense of justice. It means anybody who does anything wrong, I have to die. You know, this is really crazy stuff. It's nonsense. People have gotten famous for it all through the years. There's one man who preached a sermon a couple of 100 years ago that when you go to seminary, if you ever go to seminary, they'll tell you about that sermon. Jonathan Edwards preached a sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And it was very effective. Scared that, excuse me, I almost said something I shouldn't have there. But that's what Jonathan Edwards thought he was doing. And I'm not trying to judge him because for all I know, his teachers told him that and he thought he was doing the right thing. But it was the wrong thing. Now we live in an age when tolerance has become much more highly valued than truth in many segments of our society. Oh, don't say truth may be relative. Might be your truth, but not my truth, not his truth, not her truth. This is nonsense. You know, if you jump off a building, you're going to get hurt. And that's not just my truth. That's truth. And truth is real. Truth is real. Tolerance is not love. This is why I titled the sermon a couple of weeks ago, What About Tolerance and Teaching? But I didn't preach it that way because I didn't really have it straight yet and have it in a way that I could show it to you where you see why. What's wrong with tolerance? What's wrong with tolerance is like watching a blind man walk toward a ditch, and you can't do that. Tolerance is not love. Many people have come to see that in secular contexts. They've come to see that. Many people have come to see that it's not loving to tolerate severely polluted air and water. Oh no, that's not good. We shouldn't tolerate that. We know it's not loving to tolerate contaminated food, so we have inspectors in sausage factories and other places where we wonder, whether the food is really safe. We know that it's not loving to tolerate the production and marketing of unsafe or useless medicines. We know that it's not loving to tolerate horribly inadequate schools in disadvantaged neighborhoods. We profess as a people to be in favor of all efforts to fight all those evils. Good. Undiscriminating tolerance is heartless disregard